Hello and welcome back to VGC for this review discussion of The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. I'm here with Andy Robinson. How are you?
I'm good, mate. How are you?
I'm very, very well.
We're getting to the right end of the week, aren't we?
I mean, you say that, but what is it? It was Wednesday. I woke up thinking it was Thursday. I mean, it's been a
That
long one.
counts.
Yeah, it's review season. It's always kicking off. Speaking of review season, you've been playing a hell of a lot of Legend of Zelda Echoes of
I
Wisdom.
have.
For those not aware, set it up. What is this? Is this a spin-off title? Is this a mainline? Where are we in the Zelda canon?
You'd think it was a spin-off from the fact that it's obviously it's the first game to actually star Zelda as a protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
Finally, I mean, I think fans have been asking for that for decades at this point. But I would say, despite what you might think from the positioning, it's very much a staunchly traditional Zelda game. If this game starred Link as the main protagonist, you wouldn't blink twice, really. Um,
Okay.
so it's the follow up to Link's Awakening. So if you remember the Switch remake of Link's Awakening, which is made by a studio called Grezzo, who created all of Nintendo's or most of them Zelda remakes in recent years. The handheld ones like Zelda Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. So they've finally kind of been given a crack at their own all original game. Well deserved, by the way, because I absolutely loved Link's Awakening. I thought it was brilliant. So basically, this is another game in that vein. It's a classic style top down adventure, and you play as Zelda, as I mentioned. Basically, the setup is that it's a very traditional Hyrule style map. It's an original map, but all of the bits and pieces that you expect are there. They might as well have just copied another map, to be honest. How kind of like closely they stick to the formula. But there, these mysterious rifts have appeared around Hyrule, and they suck up like people. They've been sucking up people and items, including the king and Link that you kind of saw in that reveal trailer. And then Zelda's kind of thrust into the lead role, really. And she meets a character called Tri, which is this kind of ethereal creature who gives her a wand known as the Tri Rod. And this is now the main mechanic in the game. Players can use it to kind of copy and create objects in the world, so enemies
Okay.
or items. So you can once you an item in the world it'll be shimmering to indicate that it can be used. They call them echoes. And once you've learned it, you can make as many as you want as within kind of like a set. Each one has like a power cost. So to be
Okay.
honest, you might be able to put down like 5 pots, but only one big hulking mobbling. So then the idea is that you use those for combat and for puzzle solving.
Hmm.
Instead of because you haven't got a sword or a shield or anything like that, any of your traditional items. So this is supposed to be the main mechanic. I mean, the story goes that this actually started as a dungeon creator Zelda game that
Yeah.
they were testing, and they went, "Well, why don't we? This is quite fun. Why don't we turn it into a main game?" I kind of wish they'd left it as a dungeon creator.
I was gonna
Um,
ask.
it's so I'm kind of expecting that I'm going to be one of the more negative reviews of this game. It always makes me laugh whenever people who haven't worked haven't been a games critic. You often see criticism like, "Oh, why do you, give reviews for certain games to fans of those games?" You know, of course they're going to be favourable, and I think that's nonsense. I think
Yeah.
fans of games are more critical. I mean, you can see around me. I'm a big Nintendo fan. I review most Nintendo games. I don't think I'm more favourable of them. I would say I'm more critical. So this game, for example, is fine.
Hmm.
Like if this is if you're 20 years old and this is one of your first Zelda games, you're going to have a great time with this. There's plenty to love. Like it's pretty charming. Like the world's beautiful to look at. There's like some fun characters to meet. It's got lots of interesting ideas. It just like for someone like me, if you've played a lot of them, it's just not as good for me as the last two kind of mainline entries, like the 2D entries. Sorry,
Hmm.
it's not as interesting or unique or satisfying as Link Between Worlds which was the real first Zelda game where they went, look, we need to change up this formula. It's getting stale before kind of pre Breath of the Wild, where they let you tackle any dungeon in any order, and you had to kind of rent items from a vendor. And the story was great, and it had a mechanic where you could turn into a 2D sprite and go across the walls and scenery. And it was quite clever, and it was well used. And then Link's Awakening, this game is not as charming as that game, and it's not as tightly designed either. I've gone back and just to double check I'm not imagining it and check that game out. And yeah, it's not nowhere near as good as that game, in my opinion.
Hmm.
There's lots of ideas here, but they just don't really flesh them out. And some of them, in my opinion, fall a bit flat, like the Echoes, which I'll get to in a bit, I'm sure. But it's kind of compounded by the fact that the systems are wrapped around like a really staunchly traditional Zelda game. Like it really has few surprises for anyone who's played, these games a lot before. It's like a succession of kind of predictable dungeons, the same kind of looking bosses. And those two elements kind of combine for this kind of really uneven experience that it's kind of like trying to do new things, but then it's also being really staunchly traditional in other areas.
So is that the kind of moment to moment then, or is it a case of you'll be given a puzzle and it's kind of up to you how to solve it? Because presumably with this ecosystem, there is an intended path for this kind of thing, but also it opens up to being kind of create your own fun style. Like, how do they manage those two elements?
That's what I mean, that where it's like this weird clash of styles, because the game itself is like just a very traditional Zelda game. You have some freedom in kind of like what you might go, oh, do you want to go to this dungeon or that dungeon? That amount of freedom. But otherwise, you're going to the fire dungeon, you're going to the water dungeon, you're going to go to the desert, you're going to meet the Gerudo, you're going to meet the Gorons. Like, they've got a problem. It's all like, I wouldn't have had too many complaints if they just left it as like the Link to the Past map, like they did in one of the previous games. Because the focus here should have been on them making the most of these systems rather than, probably a lot of effort's gone into making this world, which is really not that. I'm trying to think of my language here, because it's fine. It's fine, but fine's not really good
It's
enough.
not what you come
Zelda
to Zelda
games, right?
for. You
It's
can
like, I
expect a
want
bit
to
of
be,
whimsy.
surprised and delighted. It's just a stage, and that's what it should be. And I don't know, like it doesn't. They're trying to. There's so many Breath of the Wild systems in this game, right? They're clearly trying to Breath of the Wild eyes, the classic formula, but they don't really like. It's just this awkward, like compromise all the time between the two styles. Like the Echoes, they do give you some freedom, and I'm sure, like outside of the review environment, we'll see more of that, because you got to put it. I'm reviewing this in isolation, right? It's not like I'm on the internet. Oh, look, I didn't think of that, and I didn't think of that. But certainly, from my experience, it seems like it doesn't have the same level of freedom as like a big 3D world, that's based on system-based gameplay like Breath of the Wild has. You're not like shooting yourself to the final boss from the start and making this big hulking monster, right? It's more like, oh, you light these torches. How are you going to light them? Oh, well, I set the grass on fire and then that lit up and went across a box and set it on fire. Or I threw a fire bat at it. And, or it might be, how are you going to cross this gap? Oh, I put some, assembled a staircase from a load of beds. Or I propelled myself with this, enemy that blows wind. It's like, yeah, you have some freedom, but I don't think quite to the level of, say, a Breath of the Wild. And again, it comes down to like, it'll come down to people's preference, like whether you take more satisfaction from a well-crafted, kind of linear puzzle that a designer's made, you figure it out, or whether you take more satisfaction from skipping a large chunk of dungeon because you've managed to break the game, by flying on a flying floor tile that you've manifested, which is something I did. And so it does come down to personal preference. It's cool that they brought a lot of the chemistry system from Breath of the Wild. Like I said, like you can set stuff on fire and it'll kind of like, it'll light the grass and the enemies will catch on fire and things like that. And some of the puzzles, like there's some kind of physics puzzles where you got to like, figure out what item's going to like, sink in the water and what's going to float in the water and, things like that. And there's even, they've kind of like nicked the ultra hand from
Oh, okay.
yes, but so you can like carry large objects from afar, but you can't
Mm.
do anything with them. Like you can carry them. I think you can hold the R button and you can like sort of like, you'll be binded to them. So say there's like a walking statue. If you like grabbed it with this bind ability and then hold RB, it would pull you along, like you're
Oh,
binded
okay.
to it. So, but there's not a huge amount of those kind of puzzles. And
Is there?
there's loads. This is like kind of the theme of the game, right? You can make recipes, right? Like Breath of the Wild.
Yeah.
There's the world is scattered. You're cutting the grass, and it's dropping ingredients and stuff like that. And you go to a vendor and you cook them up. And it's like, oh, I've made a smoothie that gives me a 3-minute heat resistance, or 3-minute cold resistance, or 3 minutes faster climbing, and things like that. And then the game just never uses them. Like I
Mm.
can think of one section in the main path that lasts about 2 minutes where you might need to use one of those. Um, like there's other Breath of the Wild stuff. Like let me think on my feet here. I'm just trying to skim my review because it's a very big review. Other than the Ultra Hand there and the ability to craft recipes, there's like you can go and visit a vendor and he can like make like he can combine enemies and make a robot version for you.
All right.
And that
Okay.
again, that's something else that's like completely overlooked. You can just finish the game without even paying any attention to that. And they're just like they're like if they break, you've got to go back to the vendors, have them repaired, and things like that. They're just kind of like they go out of their way to
Hmm.
make these features like very optional.
Is there side
Um,
stuff that requires that kind of stuff? Is there like harder side dungeons that might require some of
Not
that
really. I
stuff?
mean,
Or?
you've got to do it's a lot of fetch questing, right?
Hmm.
That's the thing is there's quite a lot of fetch questing in this. Like, there's a lot of like you'll go into these dungeon overworld, venture is padded out a bit by these rifts that you have to go in and cleanse. And they're like item hunts. It's like find 5 of these items, like the same item, like find 5 of these, gems, and yeah, you go around, you find them, and it's like it's all right. You'll feel
You're
like
not selling it.
you're occupying time. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like the ecosystem is most fun, like in the platforming. It's like I
Mm.
said with some of those puzzles, like physics puzzles and stuff like that. Like it's quite fun to like build like kind of like a wall of beds that you can use to climb over a tree ridge and access an area that you feel like you shouldn't have, right? Um, and there's lots of 2D sections they've taken from Link's Awakening, and everything translates to that. Like all the echoes and stuff, they translate to 2D, and that's all like really cool. But it's kind of the combat where it falls down. Like it's quite novel at the start where you're summoning these baddies to fight for you, but then after a while you realise that you're just picking the same one. So it's over 100 echoes in the game. You probably use about 10, like
Mm.
multiple times. The game never really challenges you. It rarely challenges you to change up your approach, like other than maybe like changing a fire bat for a ice bat,
Yeah.
for a particular moment. It doesn't really challenge you to change your way of thinking, and that's a shame because there are sections that hint at that, right? The best moments of the game are when it kind of has the confidence to kind of embrace some of these new ideas, like fully. Say, for example, there are sections where you can't use, like you can only use items in the main vicinity of where you are. Like there's challenge stages, like side stages, where they'll task you from completing custom dungeon rooms as fast as possible, only using items and creatures in that room. So there might be a bat and you kill it, and then you'll get the echo, and then you might use the bat to defeat something else, and vice versa. And that's way more interesting than the actual dungeons that they put in the game. There's another crucial point that I've skimmed over here, by the way, on the combat. So, kind of like you kind of like spawn these baddies to fight for you, but you're limited by like the amount of points you have to spend on what you can spawn, right? So you've either got these little small bat or critters that kind of die in one hit, or you got these big hulking guys that are just slow. And it's like after a while, it's just like you're playing a tower defense game where there were some bosses, genuinely some bosses, including like the final boss, where I'm just I'm a like part I'm a viewer of this.
Yeah.
I'm just running around making sure I don't get hit while my other guys just finish the job for me. And I think like in acknowledgement of that, there's this really odd like compromise where they've put in this sword fighter ability. So basically, you get it very early on. Zelda can basically turn into like Spirit Link, and then suddenly you've got his sword and you've got his like bow and arrow and his bombs and stuff, and it's like, oh, you're Link, and it's on an energy bar that lasts like probably like 10, 15 seconds that you can upgrade and stuff. But that kind of compromises the echoes even more for combat because you just turn into Link, and it means that it doesn't really feel particularly unique, but at the same time, it doesn't feel satisfying as if you were unlocking these items and fighting yourself, because you've got to keep in mind these replace items. The dungeons are not like traditional item-based dungeons where
Yeah.
you'll get a boomerang and then you might backtrack. And so that Metroidvania element is kind of missing as well, which I found a little bit disappointing.
Is there any actual merit to this being Zelda that's the protagonist? Do they do anything interesting with that?
That's what I was
Or
going to get to, is because that fact that you can literally turn into Link is a bit of a cop-out, right?
yeah.
Not narratively and mechanically. I really hoped that it wouldn't be, but I kind of feel like it is. Like I feel like the game would be better if it wasn't in there, and there were more restrictions in place. I really do. Um, and yeah, like honestly, it's so nice to play a Zelda, and there's nice moment. There are some nice moments that are hinted at what it could have been. Like there's like little soap operas inside the castle. Like there are periods of the story where you're in the castle with a king and his aides, and you know their day to day kind of interactions, and that really hints at, oh, this could have been good fun, right? Maybe it's even like a family thing where it's structured on going on Monster Hunter style, quests, right? Going
yeah.
on hunts, like that could have been really special, but they don't really like commit to that. And I hate saying it, but yeah, like it could be Link. Like you could just reskin the game.
Mm.
It is just like you've got a new ability, but obviously it's a silent protagonist. Anyway, I don't think thematically they've changed much. It's a staunchly traditional Zelda setup.
Mm. Okay. Few other things. Visuals. Is it the same kind of style as their previous? It seems kind
Yeah,
of
it's the
in the
same style,
middle.
really, really pretty. It's like a toy box style. It's like you're kind of looking down, playing with your toys. It's very, very pretty game.
Mm.
The only disappointment is, frustratingly, the performance issues from the last game are back.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's kind of like, I don't see how that's acceptable after 5 years. They're just areas of the overworld you get to that will just chug. They'll drop down massively, like they did in
Mm.
Link's Awakening. I mean, Nintendo's kind of got form for not really caring about this stuff, but I don't think it's acceptable at this point. I don't think they even attempted to patch those issues in that game.
In terms of, so when I first saw it and I saw the previews of people using the bed, the kind of bed bridges and stuff, and this is a stolen line from Chris Scullion, but it reminded me of Scribble Knots, where people would just go to the thing that breaks the puzzle straight away. Is there any reason
Yeah,
not to do
those
that?
beds. Yeah, like the first thing you learn, one of the first things you learn is a bed, and I was still using that after 20 hours as
Okay,
my
that
main
answers my
means,
question then.
my main means of like platforming.
Mm.
Bed. There are certainly like it's weird because it's like they said they compromise some of these new elements to make sure you don't use them too much, right? Like, oh, make sure you use sword fighting and make sure you use these kind of automons, the robots, and but then they put in stuff like quite early in the game you get just a block of water, like a cube, like a Minecraft cube,
Yeah.
and then that's now the one of the top two items in. Like, why would you use anything else? Why are you going to use a table or a pot when you can just put down 4 blocks of water and just swim up the side of a mountain?
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know, like things like that. Like one of the first enemies I got in the game, I can't remember what they're called. They've got a weird name, but it's from the first Zelda. It's a big flying plant with spikes,
All
right?
right. Okay.
And it's massive, and it just spins, turns into a spinning rotisserie blade of death. And I got it in the first hour, and I was still using it at the end of the game.
There you go. Mm.
It's
Yeah.
a good game. It's worth playing. It really is. It's just, if this wasn't called Zelda, this is crucial. If it was some original Capcom IP, you'd probably be focusing on the positives more. like, oh, this is quite a novel idea, But because it's Zelda, we're kind of like, it just feels like really weirdly undercooked for this series. I also think the fact that it's probably contributes to that is that it's on the same console as Switch. This is new
Yeah.
territory because we've had undercooked Zeldas before, weird spin-offs, right? But they were all on Nintendo DS. You
Like
know,
that first Hyrule Warriors that ran at
yeah.
about
Well,
three
I
frames
mean,
a
I'm I'm,
second.
I'm talking more like Spirit Tracks
Oh
and
yeah.
the other one, right? Um, like they were like lesser Zelda games, but they're handheld Zelda games. Yeah, okay. Whereas it's kind of less acceptable when this is on the same console as Link's Awakening and Breath of the Wild. It's just a, it's just an, it's the, I mean, it's the worst Zelda game on Switch. I mean, it doesn't mean it's bad,
Mm.
but it is the worst Zelda game on Switch.
Do you think this will be the end of the kind of Breath of a Wildfication of Zelda? Do you think we'll
No,
get
I think
back
they're
to
very good at
normal?
learning. I think they're very good at learning. I do think that the ingredients are here for a really special Zelda. I do. It's just they just don't kind of like take these mechanics to their fullest. I think and I hope that they'll do another one and they'll take these and they'll learn from them, and they'll expand. Maybe not using the echoes as a main mechanic because I don't think it is strong enough for that. It's certainly not in combat. But no, I don't think it's that bad. As I said, like people will play. I will be, if I'm not in the minority, I'll at best be 50-50 of critics on this, I think.
Mm.
Um, there will be some people saying this game's great and completely throwing, flying in the face of everything I'm saying because it's not impossible to have it. It's a Nintendo game.
Yeah.
A lot of people are going to have a great time with this game. But just from a purely critical point of view, where I'm picking holes at things, I didn't enjoy it as much as the last two. I think it could have been a lot better, and I wish it was.
Okie doke. Well, you can read Andy's full review on VGC. If you like this content and want more podcasts and videos, check out patreon.com/video games chronicle. Until next time, say goodbye, Andy,
Goodbye.
and we'll see you later.